The midday heat clung to the rocks like a second skin. Somewhere, deep in the heart of Sage Hollow Preserve, Utah's vast and unforgiving red rock wilderness, Ranger Wesley Grant dangled on the brink of death. His back pressed against the gnarled trunk of an ancient juniper tree, arms bound tight behind him with coarse nylon rope. His lips were split, bleeding, his throat burned. Sweat had long since stopped flowing. 30 hours, maybe more. He'd stopped counting after the first night. His radio lay shattered at his feet, the solar-powered emergency beacon beside it reduced to mangled plastic and scorched circuitry. His canteen, smashed and poured into the dirt by the poachers who'd left him here, was now just a cruel memory. "This is what you get for sticking your nose where it don't belong," the leader had said with a sneer, before yanking the final knot tight. "Maybe next time you'll think twice about protecting things that ain't yours." Wesley had been a senior wildlife ranger for over a decade, but this was a first. He'd seen plenty: illegal hunters, cattlemen pushing boundaries, even rogue campers. But nothing like this. These guys weren't weekend warriors. They were organized, brutal, and clearly not afraid to send a message. And now, their message was baking under the August sun. He blinked through swollen eyelids, trying to focus on the horizon. Nothing but sandstone ridges and scraggly desert brush. His legs were numb. His wrists were raw. Every breath felt like sandpaper sliding down his throat. He tried yelling again, but only a dry rasp came out. "Not like this," he mumbled. "Not out here." He shifted his weight, wincing as the ropes bit deeper into his skin. Pain shot up his arms, but it was dulled. Almost distant now. That scared him more than anything. He'd trained himself to recognize the signs of hypovolemic shock. He was losing ground, fast. Don't sleep, don't give in. He jerked his head up at the sound of something. Faint, rhythmic. Not the wind, not the buzzing of flies, hoofbeats. At first, he thought it was just his brain playing tricks. But the sound grew louder, sharper, hooves striking rock in steady unison. He turned his head, barely able to lift it, just as a group of wild mustangs crested the nearby ridge. His heart skipped. 15, maybe more, moving in formation like a fluid living wave. Dust swirled behind them. Leading the herd was a jet-black stallion, muscles rippling under a sun-slicked coat, a single white marking, like a sock, on his right foreleg. Wesley's breath caught. "Shadow mane," he whispered. He'd seen this herd before during patrols and had quietly named the stallion in his reports. The black beauty was elusive, almost ghostly, never stayed in one place for long. Wild, untouchable. Until now. Normally, wild mustangs would avoid any trace of humans, but this time they didn't bolt, they slowed. The stallion raised his head, nostrils flaring, sniffing the air. Wesley could feel his gaze, even from 30 yards away. "Go on," he croaked. "Ain't nothing here but a dead man." But Shadowmane didn't turn. He stepped forward. One cautious stride, then another. Behind him, a dun mare and a few younger colts followed, fanning out in a loose arc, their movements slow, deliberate. Wesley held perfectly still, barely breathing. Every instinct told him this shouldn't be happening. The Mustangs weren't just passing through, they were studying him. Curiosity, or something more? Shadowmane stopped a few feet away, his dark eyes locked on Wesley's. The stallion lowered his massive head and brought his muzzle within inches of the ranger's boots. Wesley blinked. Was this real? Was this death creeping in, weaving hallucinations? "I don't suppose you know how to untie knots, do you, big guy?" he rasped, a ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Shadowmane tilted his head, nostrils flaring again. Then, slowly, He reached out and nudged Wesley's boot with the soft curve of his nose. A contact so gentle it nearly broke him. Wesley's eyes welled, though there were no tears left to give. He wasn't afraid anymore. He didn't know why, but something inside him shifted, somewhere beyond pain, beyond thirst. Shadowmine didn't run. He didn't rear or flee or call his herd away. He simply stood there, watching, waiting. As the sun dipped lower on the red horizon and shadows began to stretch across the basin, the herd settled. Some began to graze. A few younger ones lay down among the rocks. But all remained within sight, within reach. Shadowmane positioned himself closest to Wesley, his body between the ranger and the wind now beginning to pick up. The desert grew quiet. Night began to fall. Wesley drifted in and out of consciousness, the lines between waking and dreaming blurring into soft edges and dark shapes. Each time he stirred, the stallion was there. Not leaving, not yet. The last thing Wesley saw before sleep finally took him was the silhouette of Shadowmane, standing like a sentry in the dying light, unmoving, unwavering, a wild guardian. Morning in Sage Hollow came harsh and bright. The sun had barely crested the jagged ridge to the east, yet already the heat pressed down like an invisible weight. A faint breeze stirred the dust, but it brought no relief. Wesley Grant stirred, waking with a ragged inhale that scraped his throat like gravel. His tongue felt like leather, his lips cracked and bloody. He blinked slowly, his eyes crusted and swollen. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. Then the searing pain in his shoulders brought it back. The ropes, the poachers, the tree. Still here, still tied, still dying. He turned his head with effort, every movement like lifting lead. And then, once again, he saw them. The Mustangs. They hadn't left. Shadowmane stood a few feet away, hooves planted firm, tail flicking slowly as he watched the bound man with quiet intensity. Around him, the rest of the herd grazed or stood in loose clusters. Some nosed at the sparse desert shrubs, others simply watched. They had stayed through the night. Wesley stared at them, his pulse slow and unsteady. "You're still here?" he rasped. The stallion's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. This wasn't possible. Wild horses didn't do this. They ran at the first whiff of a human, much less hovered over one like sentinels. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to summon the strength to scream, to cry out for help. But his throat was long past words. He could barely swallow. The air shimmered with heat. Time passed in fragments. Then movement caught his eye. Shadowmane stepped away. Wesley followed him with sluggish eyes as the stallion trotted off toward a patch of dry earth about 50 yards away. There, the black horse began pawing at the ground. Not in frustration, not at random. It was purposeful. Again and again, Shadowmane dug with his powerful forelegs, hooves scraping against the parched soil. A few of the other horses watched, ears forward. A dun-colored mare joined him, nosing the same spot. The dust rose around them in thin spirals. And then, to Wesley's astonishment, the earth darkened. Water, a small shimmer, barely more than a puddle, but real. The stallion dipped his muzzle and drank deeply. The dun mare followed. One by one, several horses came forward to take their turns. Wesley's heart pounded weakly. That water, so close. He could see the droplets clinging to their whiskers, the way their muzzles dripped as they turned away. He couldn't look away. Every cell in his body screamed for moisture. And then something impossible happened. The dun mare, the same one who had stood nearest him the day before, began walking toward him. Her stride was cautious but steady, her belly heavy with foal. Wesley blinked slowly, watching her through a haze of pain and disbelief. "Easy, girl," he croaked. "I won't hurt you." She stopped just within reach. Her nostrils flared as she scented him, head low and ears forward. Then, gently, she leaned in and pressed her wet muzzle to his face. It wasn't a nuzzle or a threat, it was deliberate. Moisture from her lips and whiskers smeared against his. A whisper of coolness, barely enough to taste, but it was water, real water. Wesley gasped, not from surprise, but from gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. She stepped back, blinking slowly. Her breath had been warm, her eyes calm and ancient, as if she understood something beyond comprehension. Then Shadowmane approached. The stallion sniffed the air, lowered his head, and repeated the act, pressing his damp muzzle to Wesley's lips. Another drop, another thread of life. Wesley shuddered with emotion. This wasn't random. This was something else. A ritual, a choice. One by one, the herd followed. Each horse, after drinking from the shallow spring, walked over and offered a fraction of what they carried. No one brought much, but together they gave just enough to soothe the fire in Wesley's throat, to soften the cracking of his lips. "You're keeping me alive," he whispered hoarsely. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows behind the juniper trees. Wesley drifted in and out, but each time he woke, the horses were there, still watching, still staying. By evening, the air cooled. The high desert, merciless by day, turned bitter at night. Wesley shivered uncontrollably. His body, already drained, had little to fight the dropping temperatures. The ropes cut deeper into his skin, his shirt damp with sweat now chilled against his back. And then he heard movement. The dun mare returned, but this time she did more than offer water. She lowered herself beside him, slowly, deliberately, pressing her warm flank against his side. Wesley gasped at the sudden heat. Tears prickled his eyes. Soon after, 2 younger horses joined her, settling around him in a loose circle. Their bodies close, their warmth radiating through the cold. They were shielding him, protecting him. He didn't understand why. He only knew that he was no longer alone. The moon rose high above the ridges, casting silver light over the red rock basin. Wesley lay against the tree, cocooned by wild creatures he had once thought unknowable, beings he'd sworn to protect, who had now turned protectors. His voice broke in the dark. "Why are you helping me?" There was no answer, only the quiet sound of breath and the occasional rustle of tails. But as he stared into the reflective eyes of the dun mare beside him, he thought, for just a second, that he saw something more than instinct. He saw understanding. Then sleep claimed him, deep and dreamless. And still the Mustang stayed. The third morning broke like fire across Sage Hollow. Light spilled over the ridges in molten gold, but there was no warmth in Wesley Grant's limbs. Despite the protection of the Mustangs through the frigid night, his body was reaching its limit. He couldn't feel his fingers anymore. His vision was fading at the edges like a photograph left too long in the sun. He was dying, slowly, quietly. The herd was still there. The dun mare, his unexpected healer, had moved off to graze, but not far. Shadowmane stood in his usual place, stoic and alert, head high, scanning the land with the poise of a general. Wesley managed to lift his chin a few inches, and what he saw stopped his breath. Shadowmane was staring off toward the western ridge, muscles taut. His ears flicked forward. Then, with no warning, the stallion raised his head and let out a piercing cry. A high, eerie sound that echoed across the basin like a horn. Once, twice, 3 times. The entire herd froze. Even the colts stopped mid-step. All eyes turned toward the stallion. Wesley blinked, heart thudding despite the weakness. What is that? He'd never heard a Mustang make a call like that. not even during territorial disputes or breeding fights. Shadowmane trotted down the slope toward Wesley again. This time, he didn't approach like a calm observer. He moved with urgency. He reached the bound ranger and began nudging the ropes with his muzzle. Wesley groaned as the rope shifted, scraping deeper into already raw skin. "Easy, fella," he whispered. "You're gonna make me a boneless steak." But then something remarkable happened. The stallion didn't stop. With surprising finesse, he bit gently at the knot, tugging and twisting, trying to work it loose. It didn't undo, too tight, too complex, but one of the loops around Wesley's wrist shifted just enough to ease the pressure. Wesley hissed in relief. "You're serious, huh? You're not just watching me die, you're trying to help." The stallion stepped back. His chest heaved once, then he turned and walked briskly toward the heart of the herd. There, he began moving among them, not in random circles, but with intention. He nickered to a young bay, bumped a smaller stallion with his shoulder, stomped once in the dirt. 3 younger Mustangs gathered around him, forming a loose triangle. They stood still for a moment. Then the 3 horses broke off. Wesley's eyes widened. They weren't wandering. They were running. Southwest, toward the direction of Red Bluff Ranger Station, 15 miles away. They moved with purpose, manes flying in the sun, hooves pounding the earth in perfect rhythm. Wesley stared after them, lips trembling. "If this is real, if y'all are actually doing this—" He didn't finish the sentence. There wasn't enough hope left in him to dare. He slumped back against the tree, exhausted beyond description. His mind flickered like a dying candle. He drifted in and out of awareness, sometimes hearing the wind whispering, sometimes hearing voices he knew weren't there. But out in the real world, something was happening. At Red Bluff Station, the morning had been quiet. Ranger Eli Ramirez leaned against the open tailgate of the service truck, sipping coffee, while Clara Joyner adjusted a drone camera for aerial surveying. Then came the thunder. "Do you hear that?" Clara asked, narrowing her eyes. Eli stood up, listening. Hoofbeats, fast, coming straight toward them. Within seconds, 3 wild Mustangs burst out of the scrubland beyond the fence line. A black bay, a chestnut, and a young, dark gray colt. "What the hell?" Eli muttered, setting down his mug. The horses didn't stop. They galloped right up to the edge of the station perimeter, hooves skidding in the gravel. They whinnied, snorted, stamped. They were making noise on purpose. "That's not random," Clara said slowly. "They're not scared. They're—" "Trying to get our attention," Eli finished. Then the bay turned, took a few steps, stopped, and looked back over its shoulder. The others followed. "Wait," Clara said, heart racing. "Wait a second, look at that black one. Is that Shadowmane? That's Grant's." Eli didn't hesitate. "Gear up, now." They were in the trucks within minutes, rumbling out across the uneven trail road, following the impossible trail the horses had cut through the scrub. No one spoke. Back at the tree, Wesley heard something. At first, it was just a vibration, a low rumble. Then the unmistakable grind of tires over dirt. Voices. He opened his eyes, barely. Wesley Grant, do you copy?" He wanted to answer, wanted to scream. All he could manage was a croak. Then, over the ridge, he saw them, Eli and Clara, running from a skidding service truck, medical kits in hand. "I got him!" Eli shouted. Clara knelt beside him, already checking his pulse. "He's alive, weak, but he's alive." They cut the ropes. Eli eased him into a sitting position and offered water in slow, careful sips. Wesley trembled from head to toe. He turned his gaze up toward the top of the ridge. Shadowmane stood there, alone, watching. Grant managed a whisper. "You came back." The stallion let out a low snort, tossed his mane, then turned and disappeared over the ridge, as silently as he had arrived. The wind whispered across the ridges of Sage Hollow as the rescue chopper lifted off, its blades slicing through the quiet. Dust spiraled into the air, and the voices of shouting rangers faded beneath the rush of wind. Wesley Grant lay on a stretcher, bundled in thermal blankets, his skin pale and cracked, but alive. He tilted his head, searching the edge of the ridge one last time. And there he was. Shadowmane. The stallion stood like a statue against the morning sky, his black coat rippling in the breeze, his white-socked foreleg like a banner of something ancient and noble, his head tilted slightly, ears forward, watching. Wesley's cracked lips parted. No voice came, just a whisper in his chest. "I see you." "Thank you, old friend." As the helicopter lifted higher, Shadowmane gave a single low whinny, then turned, trotting back to his herd without fanfare. 2 weeks later, the world outside Grant's hospital room felt like a different planet. Cedar Springs Regional was a small facility nestled near the foothills of southern Utah, surrounded by pine trees and red bluffs. Wesley had made it out just in time. According to the doctors, another 12 hours and he wouldn't have made it. He was healing. Slowly, physically at least. The rest was harder. The story had already leaked. A ranger found in the wilderness, dehydrated and delirious. Saved by, depending on the report, a freak spring, a twist of fate, or, as one tabloid boldly claimed, a miracle herd of psychic horses. The newspapers had dubbed him the ranger who dreamed of horses. Most people didn't believe what he'd said about the Mustangs, the water, the warmth, the message, the messengers. They chalked it up to hallucinations brought on by sunstroke and trauma. Wesley didn't argue. He didn't waste breath trying to convince them. But the silence was heavy. Until the knock at his door. She wasn't what he expected. Mid-30s, denim jacket, sharp eyes that missed nothing. She walked in like someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. "Ranger Grant," she said, holding up a lanyard ID. "Dr. Valerie Rhodes. I'm a behavioral ecologist. Animal cognition specifically. I work with the University of Colorado." Wesley arched a brow. "Let me guess. You're here to tell me I'm crazy, but in a clinical, peer-reviewed kind of way." She cracked a small smile. "Actually, I'm here because I think you saw something extraordinary, and I want to help you prove it." That got his attention. Valerie explained that she'd been studying wild herd behaviors for over a decade. What she'd read in the preliminary ranger reports, and in the transcript of Wesley's own account, lined up with behavior patterns she'd long suspected, but never had a chance to observe in the wild. "If what you're describing is accurate," she said, "it's not just survival instinct, it's pro-social behavior. Possibly interspecies empathy." Wesley blinked at her. "I thought I was the only one crazy enough to say that out loud." "You were, until now." 1 month later, they were back. Back in Sage Hollow, where the sky seemed bigger and time moved slower. They'd brought only the essentials: high-resolution drones, heat-sensitive cameras, motion-triggered recorders, no traps, no tranquilizers, no tagging guns. It wasn't just research, it was respect. Wesley stood at the base of the western ridge at sunrise, boots crunching softly in the sand, his breath visible in the crisp autumn air. "You think they'll show?" Valerie asked quietly beside him. "I think, if they want to," he replied. And then, out of the fog, movement. First 1, then 3, then 10. The herd emerged from the morning mist like something out of legend. Shadowmane led, head high and deliberate. Behind him, the familiar dun mare, Mama, stepped with steady grace. But something was missing. Wesley's heart clenched. He scanned the group once, twice, no foal. Valerie brought the binoculars to her eyes. There, on the far ridge, she's off by herself. The dun mare stood alone near a thicket of brush, beside a small, shaky foal. Its legs trembled with each step, one clearly weaker than the rest. It struggled to walk, dipping slightly to the left. Wesley's breath caught. A white blaze ran down the foal's forehead, sharp and distinct, just like the scar on his own. "I need to go," he said, already moving. "Be careful," Valerie warned. "They won't let you close if they sense fear or force." "I'm not bringing either," he said softly. "Only thanks." He approached slowly, keeping his hands open, his eyes down. The dun mare didn't run. She didn't even flinch. She watched him, recognized him, and when he stopped a few feet away, she stepped aside. It was permission. Wesley knelt. His knees hit the earth, and for a moment he simply looked at the foal, so small, so fragile, barely standing. He pulled a tube of nutrient paste from his pack, then a small flexible splint he'd fashioned for young wildlife injuries. Gently, carefully, he applied the brace to the foal's leg, then smeared the paste along the inside of the mouth. The foal blinked up at him, unafraid. Then, from above, a shadow moved. Shadowmane stood at the crest of the hill, watching the entire scene unfold. Valerie was filming. No words, no movement, just proof. Undeniable, breathtaking proof. "We just documented cross-species trust in the wild," she whispered, barely believing it herself. Wesley turned back to Mama and her foal, the connection between them as solid and silent as the red cliffs around them. He placed a soft collar around the foal's neck with a lightweight GPS tag. "I'll be back," he said, "with better gear, more help. I promise." And somehow, he knew they understood. Snow hadn't yet fallen, but the mountains smelled like it, clean and metallic, like a knife pressed to skin. The first wind of winter swept across Sage Hollow, curling through the rocks and dry brush, setting the pines whispering. Wesley Grant stood on the viewing platform overlooking the hollow, boots planted, hands gripping the rail. Below him, the herd grazed peacefully in the golden light of a late afternoon sun. Shadowmane stood out like ink against parchment. Powerful, still, unmistakable. Beside him, Promise moved with the awkward grace of a growing foal. Her once shaky leg was braced with a new lightweight splint Wesley and Valerie had developed, allowing her to walk almost normally. The white blaze on her forehead caught the sunlight like a scar made of light. Valerie stepped up beside him, a thermos of coffee in her gloved hand. "She's gaining weight fast. I ran the data this morning. Nearly 12 pounds in the last month." "She looks steady," Wesley said quietly. "She's more than steady. That filly's a survivor." Valerie took a sip and glanced sideways at him. "You ever gonna tell me what happened out there? Not the Ranger version, the real one." Wesley didn't answer right away. He watched Shadowmane nudge Promise forward, then lift his head and scan the ridges like a sentinel. After a long silence, he said, "It wasn't just survival. It felt deliberate, like they knew exactly what I needed and gave it to me. People will think we're projecting. Let them. Doesn't make it any less true." Later that night, as they sat by the small cabin fire, Valerie scrolled through her laptop, frowning. "I don't like this." Wesley looked up from his notebook. "What?" She turned the screen toward him, an email marked urgent. "They're trying to rescind part of the conservation zone. Local development board, something about mineral rights under the hollow." "After all the evidence we submitted?" They're claiming it's not enough. Not scientifically conclusive, just anecdotal. Wesley leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. They won't stop. No, Valerie agreed, but neither will we. The next morning, Wesley was up before sunrise. He drove the Jeep out past the southern ridge, where he'd placed motion sensor cameras near the underground spring. The air was freezing, but the moment the sun crested the hills, something caught his eye. A set of fresh hoof prints near the spring's edge. Small, delicate, uneven stride. Promise. He followed them cautiously, boots crunching on frost-covered soil, until he reached the thicket. There, caught in a patch of brush, was the GPS collar they'd fitted on her months ago, chewed off, likely by Shadowmane or Mama. Wesley knelt, turning the collar over in his hands. "They're hiding again," he muttered. "Smart." Suddenly, a sharp neigh rang out from the canyon below. Wesley straightened, heart racing. That was a warning call. Another answered, then another. He broke into a run. He found them in the shallow ravine. Shadowmane's herd, clustered tightly. Promise was cornered against a dead tree, limping badly, and in front of her stood Shadowmane, ears pinned, body low. Across the dry bed, two men stood with tranquilizer rifles and a cage trailer behind them, illegal wranglers. "Hey!" Wesley roared, drawing his sidearm. "Put the rifles down, now!" The older of the two men, broad, gray-bearded, sneered. "Easy, Ranger. We're just collecting strays. Got a permit." "You don't have a permit to be on this side of the conservation boundary," Wesley snapped, his voice thunder. "And that's a protected herd. Step away." The younger man raised his rifle instinctively. Wesley's gun was already aimed. "Try me," he said coldly. Tense seconds passed. Then the older man hissed, "It ain't over," before they backed off and retreated to their truck. Wesley holstered his weapon and slowly approached the herd. Shadowmane didn't back down, but didn't charge either. Their eyes locked. "I got you," Wesley whispered. "I won't let them touch her." Promise's chest heaved as she trembled. Wesley crouched low and, with slow movements, pulled a roll of gauze and antiseptic from his bag. The wound on her leg was reopened, bleeding. She didn't move as he cleaned it. Mama stepped forward. She nosed the air near his shoulder and then nudged Promise, gently encouraging her to hold still. "I need help," he muttered, "and a hell of a lot more protection for you." That night, he called a press conference. Valerie warned him, "They'll think you're grandstanding, making it about yourself." "I don't care," he said. "If the herd's not safe, none of this means anything." Under floodlights and camera flashes, Wesley stood at the podium outside the ranger station. 6 months ago, I was stranded in the desert, starving, injured, and out of time. I was saved not by search teams or helicopters, but by a wild stallion and his herd. I survived because they chose to help me. And now, some people want to strip that land away for profit. He held up the chewed GPS collar. These animals are not myths. They are not data points. They are living, thinking creatures who understand more than we give them credit for. And I will fight anyone who tries to hurt them. A week later, the state board voted unanimously. Sage Hollow was not only to remain protected, it would be expanded. Valerie smiled when she got the news. "You did it." Wesley shook his head. "We did it, them too." The final snow fell that December. Wesley returned alone to the ridge. He stood beneath the old tree, the one where he had once almost died, and placed a new plaque in the ground. "To the wild things who showed us the way back." Behind him, a faint sound echoed, hooves against stone. He turned. Shadowmane stood there, proud and still. Promise trotted beside him, taller now, the brace finally gone. She walked with a slight tilt, but walked strong. Wesley took one step forward and removed his hat. "Thank you," he said, voice raw. Promise let out a soft whinny, and Shadowmane answered with a nod. Then the herd turned and vanished into the snow-dusted canyon, their prints the only sign they'd been there at all. But to Wesley, the echo of their hooves would never leave. Not again.